I'm Meredith Richards, and I'm president of the Road Forward, and we bring you these forums, and there's only one purpose and one mission to what we're doing, and that's public education. We have no particular point of view that we are promoting. We choose our speakers not for their points of view, but for their expertise, and that's why we're here tonight. This whole series is about learning about government from the people who know the most about it, and very often those are the public servants who have been working in government. So you see that they are among our speakers. We have elected officials among our speakers. We have academics among our speakers. We have people who know about government from the inside. And so that's really what you want to know about government, is how it works and why it works the way it does. So that's what's going to happen tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm going to try to provide some background information on the Thomas Jefferson Planning District and Planning District Commissions as a whole. I'm going to guess, with my esteemed colleagues here, we are by far the least understood local government or higher education entity probably anywhere. You know, people are used to cities. They're used to living in towns and counties and have either attended or lived near a university like UVA. Not many people will be able to say what the planning district region they live in. But for our area, the Charlottesville area, it's a very, very important thing, and especially when it comes to transportation planning. And I'll touch on in a little bit just that close relationship between planning district commissions and the Metropolitan Planning Organization, which is the transportation planning element. Also want to apologize. Somewhere in here I'll get a little mixed up because after I submitted my presentation, of course, I had to go back in and switch slides. So I'll have to stop for 1 minute and make sure I'm on the right path. But the Planning District Commission here is the Thomas Jefferson Planning District. We also support the Charlottesville-Albemarle Metropolitan Planning Organization, which is the transportation planning function for our region. We work with areas, we work with cities, counties, towns, and the university, as well as all of their stakeholders in different elements of planning, from land use planning, economic development, transportation, environmental, water quality, and quite frankly, because our membership base is from the local governments, we provide services that they think best for us to work towards. We work for that board. One of the reasons that I will say you probably have never heard from us is that we are created by the General Assembly. We are a regional government, is the way that we're classified in the legislation. We have, in Virginia, no powers to tax, no powers to pass ordinances, no powers to pass regulations. We have no dedicated state funding. So we're kind of just that passive local government trying to provide ideas, facilitation, and convening, and that's what we do. Planning districts, and I will refer to all of our types of organizations as planning districts, but whether it's here tonight or other places where you may have lived or will live in the future, planning district commissions, regional councils, regional planning bodies, councils of governments, they're all the same thing. Every state defines their regional planning bodies in a different way. The regional planning bodies, they're normally controlled by their member local governments, although some states have passed laws that grant regional bodies region-wide powers over specific functions, and other states mandate that regional bodies have these types of controls. PDCs normally offer planning, coordination, and technical assistance between members state, and federal agencies. A typical PDC serves an area of several counties, towns, cities. It can be as big as the New York City Metropolitan Council in New York, or as small as the Prince William Sound regional body in Alaska, which their entire region is 9,600 people. Whether large or small, PDCs address issues of regional and municipal planning in a number of different ways. Of the over 500 districts in the United States, 165 of these, just like us, operate their MPOs, the Metropolitan Planning Organizations, and 265 of the 500, or 556, they also operate the rural transportation planning functions. As was said earlier, in Virginia, there are 21 PDCs across the Commonwealth. From those 21, 14 of those are urban planning districts with their own MPOs. Nationally, PDCs began in 1947, and not very far from here. The very first two in 47, one was in Northern Virginia, and the other was the city of Atlanta. Virginia passed its statewide legislation creating PDCs in 1969, and the Thomas Jefferson Planning District came shortly after in 1972. Of the 21 in Virginia now, each board's makeup is very different. There are boards as high as in the 30s that meet quarterly. Our board is 12 members, of which over half have to be elected officials, and we only meet monthly. Another difference in some of the PDCs in Virginia is that there are two PDCs that actually have universities or schools of higher education as members. Virginia Tech is a member and a voting member of the Blacksburg or New River Valley PDC. And that is by special legislation by the General Assembly. It's not granted blanket, but specifically for the New River Valley. Just a map of course, where we are, but our 6 jurisdictions includes the city of Charlottesville and Albemarle County, of course, but we also represent Nelson, Fluvanna, Louisa, and Greene counties. We're about a population of 255,000 within our region. The mission of the PDC, of the Thomas Jefferson Planning District, was established by our board and was established to create effective solutions through regional vision, collaborative leadership, and professional service to our members and our members' residents and stakeholders. Just recently, our board added an organizational vision to our strategic plan. This one I particularly like because it gets right at the function of what we do, and the vision is being the intersection of ideas, partnerships, and support, creating a very cohesive region. We and our staff, we strive to be the go-to people for anything that may be multi-jurisdictional and to bring ideas of regional benefit to the individual localities. Here we go. Here's where I have to. Here we go. Intersections of ideas and implementation of those same ideas is very, very important to us to bring the best bang for the buck without intentionally excluding any of our population or stakeholders. Currently, we work in the areas of community planning, land use planning, environmental. One of our highest priorities right now is housing, and especially affordable housing, but also legislative and transportation services. Oops, I knew I'd do it. There we go. Back. Within our program areas, We perform a number of specific services to include comprehensive planning, small area planning. I just left a meeting at the city of Charlottesville where we recently completed the Cherry Avenue plan in Fifeville, and we'll be recommending that to be included in the city's comp plan. We also do specific affordable housing facilitation, technical assistance of grant writing and other services to the local governments. And one very successful program, we're the only PDC in Virginia that offers legislative liaison services. We have a registered lobbyist that works in the General Assembly for our local government members. Some recent projects that we've undertaken in the past 5 years. Every 5 years we complete a 5-year long-range transportation plan. Sometimes those will have very successful projects included in those, like the recent work on Route 29 North. Sometimes they'll have a project that stays in the plan for a long time and then it finds its way out, like the Western Bypass occurred. Currently, we're working on a transportation and land use project in Fluvanna and Louisa County, which is at Zion Crossroads. As I mentioned, we worked on the Route 29 Solutions project, another project we're very, very proud of, and it was a joint effort. The hydraulic in 29 small area and transportation plan, where we received unanimous approval from the city's planning commission, the city's city council, Albemarle County's planning commission, and the Albemarle Board of Supervisors. I'm not sure that's occurred on very many occasions, so we're very, very happy to have achieved that. We're also right now working with the Charlottesville Area Alliance, which is a group of folks first started with JABA and the Senior Center of trying to create a community that is completely age-friendly. Also, we do work in economic development with the Central Virginia Economic Development Partnership and the Go Virginia Board. Within these areas, just a few others that we're currently undertaking, and I know Meredith has been a real godsend to help us and work with us on some of our rail projects. The Amtrak station, hopefully many of you use Amtrak here, but the station itself is woefully under capacity. There are some real challenges with that project, but we're working with the city, Albemarle County, and the state, as well as Amtrak, to try to cure those ails. Also in regional efforts with both transit and housing, we're working with Albemarle County, the city of Charlottesville, and UVA to help address some of those areas. And then a lot of bike and pedestrian planning, as well as a ongoing project right now of providing a corridor plan for the Ravenna River that will begin planning all the way from Albemarle County, north of that would be, I guess, west of the city, and taking it all the way to the James River. Another history of some of the successful programs that through the work of the PDC we started, and they grew to the point that they exceeded what we could provide and became their own standalone agencies. JAUNT began at the Thomas Jefferson Planning District Commission. Piedmont Housing Alliance also was a program within the PDC. JABA was also a program, as well as the Central Virginia Economic Development Partnership, all began at the Thomas Jefferson Planning District Commission. And then finally, some things we're looking at for the future that's of regional in nature. We're currently working on obtaining funding for a regional quality of life indicators and measurement plan where we can work with all of the local governments, identify some of the priority areas that we all should be working towards, and then provide a routine update of how well we're reaching those milestones. A second thing that has never been done for this region, which coming here from Baton Rouge was a little surprising for me, There has never been a regional comprehensive economic development plan or strategy. Something from small business right up to very large business. So we're working on funding for that. And finally, we do a regional hazard mitigation plan every 5 years. It's required of FEMA so that should a catastrophe, a national disaster happen here, you have to have an updated plan to be eligible for FEMA funding. But we're trying to now begin to incorporate climate resiliency with that so that they can both be looked at together. That's just an idea of what we do. Love to take questions when we're done. Thank you.
So what I'm going to do is spend just a little time kind of going over the many different partnerships and collaborative projects and initiatives the university has in the past, today, and hopefully in the future with our local governments and our other community partners. Before I do that, though, I guess I would state from the outset that I think many people, citizens generally, don't realize everything the university does in the community. So maybe you'll all learn something tonight. But I think that it's important to, at least for me, to say that the university is a huge entity, right? I mean, we have over 15,000 employees. Our budget is $3.8 billion. We're a big entity, and that's a positive thing for the community, I think. I hope that people believe that we contribute a lot of positive benefits. But I think we also realize that because we are so large, that we do have a big impact on the community, and sometimes that impact might not always be positive. And it may strain resources or cause some issues. So just to kind of set that out there and acknowledge that we realize that too, and we are working to address some of that. So with that in mind, you may have heard recently about some things that the university is beginning to embark on in terms of community partnerships. And I'll talk about those at the end, but wanted to just share several things within these 5 areas that are listed on the slide. And some of those, you heard a little bit from Chip, so I'll try not to duplicate. So land use and the environment is a big area of collaboration and coordination between the university and the city and the county. Charlottesville, Chip didn't talk about the Three-Party Agreement, so I will. Charlottesville, Albemarle, and the university back in 1986 entered into what we call the Three-Party Agreement. And basically, that was an agreement among us to share planning and development projects around land use, particularly from the university's perspective as we butt up against the boundaries of the county and the city, and our development begins to expand beyond what used to be the historical central grounds. And out of that agreement, what is affectionately known as PAC, the Planning and Coordination Council, was formed, which had representatives on it from the university, the city, and the county. That was an advisory body, not a decision-making body, and met regularly about 4 times a year. It was a way to have conversations around land use planning issues. Most recently, that group decided that perhaps there was a better way to deal with those kinds of issues, and that the functions and the exploring kind of land use issues would be better done by technical staff that are experts in that area, rather than elected officials and like the president or the COO of the university. And so we recently actually dissolved the PAC and formed a new group, the Land Use and Environmental Planning Committee, and we broadened the scope. Yeah, we don't like the acronym, but we couldn't think of anything better. We broadened the scope to include the Ravenna Water and Sewer Authority and the UVA Foundation, in addition to the university, because the foundation owns quite a bit of our real estate as well. But and we're going to look at not just land use, but infrastructure issues and stormwater and the environment and solid waste and sustainability. So that group recently had their inaugural meeting a couple of weeks ago. I attended. Teron Richardson, Jeff Richardson were both there, and I mean, it was crazy. It was a great atmosphere. There was all kinds of conversation going on, a lot of energy in the room. So I'm really looking forward to see what will come out of that meeting, and then that group. And as a result, the university, the city, and the county have also agreed to twice a year meet jointly. The leadership that will be the entire Board of Supervisors, the entire City Council, and the leadership of the university to meet together in a public forum to kind of report out on the work of all of those technical folks. So that will be something different that we're working on. So the university does participate in all kinds of groups related to land use and environmental planning. Just as an example, I mean, we partnered years and years ago when it was decided that the Ivy landfill should be closed down, that the university partnered with the city and the county in providing the funding to allow that to happen. We have, actually, I don't know whether you know this, but the Ravenna Water and Sewer Authority has a water treatment plant on Observatory Hill, which is on university land. And so we lease that land to them. And in fact, we're going through a process with them right now where they are having to expand the plant. And so we're renegotiating that lease with them. Sustainability, I think, is one of our really kind of best models of collaboration in a sense, because the folks that do sustainability at the university and at the city and the county are very active and passionate about that and are very collaborative in terms of the kinds of activities. They meet regularly, they share expertise, they share initiatives. So that's one of the very big areas of collaboration, I think. Transportation, Chip talked a lot about transportation. As you know, the university has a bus system which has to move a lot of people, a lot of students around every day on grounds. But we do collaborate with the city and the county. We have a seat on the Charlottesville Transit Advisory Board. We are now a voting member of the Regional Transit Partnership. We coordinate with some of these new transportation services that you've seen happen recently, like the Crozet Connect, and some other things. We're connecting up to the Research Park on 29 North. We are involved in all of those, and as well as working collectively on pedestrian improvements in and around the grounds and adjacent to the grounds, and bike pathways as well. We do have a reciprocal ridership program which the university invests in to allow our own staff and faculty and students to ride city buses, but also allows citizens to ride university buses at no cost. And one of the big partnerships is the Smart Scale project on Emmett Street, which runs from Ivy Road north to Arlington Boulevard. I mean, we helped the city with the proposal that they made for that project to the state, which got them $12.1 million in funding. And And we're really looking forward to the development of how that's going to launch in the start of construction, which is getting closer, I think, to being visible. Healthcare, I think that you could imagine with a major medical center that we are a big partner in the community when it comes to providing healthcare. We provide over $180 million worth of Medicaid and indigent care to the citizens of this area. But we also have a very active community outreach area of the health system. There are some individuals who lead a lot of partnerships out in the community. Sometimes low-income folks are not comfortable coming to the big, huge teaching hospital and would rather be served closer and out in their community. We've had clinics out in churches because that's where folks feel more comfortable coming. We're in conversations with the lower income housing developments about putting clinics out into those areas. So we have a number of those kinds of partnerships as well. Emergency services, I think we have kind of a model of a joint regional collaboration around emergency services. The 911 center that's out on 250 is operated jointly between the the university and the two jurisdictions, the city and the county. We mobilize whenever we have to mobilize the emergency operations center. That's done at Zamer Hall, which is where our School of Continuing Professional Studies is, off of Alderman Road. The land that the 911 center is on is university land. The county owns the building, so it's a real partnership in that way. We have mutual aid agreements with the city police department in terms of policing, so that both police departments know who's responsible for responding to calls depending on the area, particularly when you're butting up between the city and the university's grounds. And we voluntarily make contributions for fire services for the 911 center and for the rescue squad as well. Chip mentioned economic development. We have long been a member of the Central Virginia Partnership for Economic Development, which serves Charlottesville, Albemarle, and some surrounding counties. We are also involved with Go Virginia and in helping to develop some proposals that have been submitted to Go Virginia and have received some funding for those. So that's kind of important. And then in terms of economic generally, this is we did this study back in 2015, and this is the university's impact on the state of Virginia. $5.9 billion. 80% of that, though, is all in the local Charlottesville, Albemarle community. So it's about $4.8 billion of economic impact, creating about 45,000 jobs in total. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about community engagement and kind of where we're going in the future. When President Ryan arrived about 2 years ago, he started a strategic planning process, and recently the board approved his 2020 to 2030 plan called Great and Good. And that a centerpiece of that plan is all about community engagement and the university's efforts to partner better with its neighbors. So President Ryan formed the UVA Community Working Group shortly after his arrival. They spent a good amount of time kind of studying the issues, taking input from community members on how the university could strengthen its relationships with the surrounding community. And they identified a number of areas, but they identified 4 of the top priority areas that they would like to see the university work in partnership with them to improve. One is jobs and wages. the other affordable and workforce housing, healthcare, and education. So we are in the process of forming work groups that would have both university representation and community representation on to examine many different aspects of all four of those areas. He recently, in the fall of this past year, kind of converted that working group to a permanent, what he calls the President's Council on UVA Community Partnership. So it's a permanent group, and it works directly with the president. So you'll see in the coming weeks and months more kind of information and announcements about the work of that group and the smaller working groups as well. One of the first things we did related to the jobs and wages area is the university did increase its minimum wage to a living wage of $15 an hour for all of its full-time employees, and then we worked with our major contractors to cause them to also increase the wages to the employees that they have as well. We've established an equity center that aims to redress racial and socioeconomic inequality in university communities. We hope it might be a model for other areas around the country who have universities in their communities. But it's a research-based center. So there's a lot that we're looking at. I think we're trying to find the best strategy for the university to use that we might help in the affordable housing area. That's really important to our current rector as well as the president. It's not something the university is very familiar with how to do, so we're looking for some help in not only from the community but from some experts in that area to figure out the best way forward. And with that, that's it. Thanks.
Good evening. Hope you all are well. One thing we kind of wanted to touch on is that, as you know, Colette was mentioning the university's president. Our councils do the policy, and the board of supervisors focus on policy. But they have a county administrator, we have a city manager, and obviously there's a number of folks at the university who provide its leadership team. But all three of those have changed the top person in those administrative roles in the last 2 years. So starting with the county, then the university, and then the city. So I think it's a really unique time in this region because there's so much new kind of perspective that's been brought in and leadership in that capacity. And I think it's a really great opportunity for us to really look at how we're going to work together as a region moving forward. Relationships, we talked, she and I had a little chit chat this last week, but we have to consider relationships both within our organizations and within each of our councils, and obviously the university has its own relationships, but then we think about the relationships that we're building across our leadership teams and how we want to work together. And I wish I could say that I have a coffee set up with every county supervisor on a regular basis, but I don't. Mostly it's with Liz. And then I do overlap with and some of these appointed boards with some others. But I think it's something that I'm committed to is they have 2 new folks on their board, and we have had 3 new counselors, so 3 out of 5 of us are new in this January, which is a huge shift for a council of 5. I think it's so important that we recognize that sometimes those one-to-one relationships can sometimes be just as valuable as those full council and board-seated meetings that we're anticipating doing in the future. Did you have anything you wanted to kind of add on that?
One?
Personalities.
Personalities. One thing I really like about local government is you're all sort of thrown onto a board together. These are not people that you would necessarily be best buddies with. They're not always people that you align well with your things that you think are important. We often hear, "Oh, we're all Democrats." Now that the Board of Supervisors are all they must all be together on things. That just doesn't work that way. There's people have different ideas of what they think is important. We have issues when we get to budgeting. One person thinks transportation is more important. Another person thinks that having trash services in a rural area is important. Or any number of things like social services, et cetera. And the same thing, I'm sure.
And I can see it being especially challenging in the county because, as Liz just pointed out, like she's got constituents who don't have internet, access. I mean, that's not something that we really are challenging within the city or within some of her own colleagues in the more urban ring environment. And so there is a big disparity of just the needs of the constituents that we are serving. But it is important that we recognize that this can't be about us personally getting along or that we're all going to be seeing eye to eye. But it's so important that we have to have some common ground and some collaboration in order to help things move forward. And I would argue my biggest frustration as someone who was watching as a citizen, and even in my first 2 years in office, is just how slow things get done. One of my biggest mantras is I have to push the noise out of my way and focus on that signal. And it's something that is certainly a priority for me as this new council has come on board. And we have a couple really big things ahead of us in the city. And one of them is really revisiting our strategic plan. And I think in doing so, understanding how does that look versus what the universities does? How does that look versus what the county's looking at? Not saying that we're all going to be fully aligned, but an example, as Colette mentioned earlier, the university had their working group from the community that came forward, and they developed a set of priorities. And we were re-looking at how we were going to allocate funding to our nonprofit organizations. And we ended up really kind of taking the lead that they had set because it was largely involving community members. And we said we are going to prioritize many of those same areas for how we're going to push dollars out to our nonprofit partners that focus on many of these areas as well. Because if we're all going after different priorities, the funding itself, if we're not focusing in one area, you're never going to see progress in those areas. And so we've really kind of taken a more, let's not fund everyone a little bit, but let's really focus our efforts in those nonprofit sectors on things that we already know the university is embracing and that we also agree need to be embraced, and then working through with the county and how do we kind of fold them into that mix. And so those are just some examples of how some of these things evolve. But again, I can't emphasize enough, it can be so frustrating at times because even within your own organization, you're having these tensions, let alone when you're trying to solve them outside of your organization. I'm sorry, I'm just chatting away.
No, that's exactly what we decided we were going to talk about. I would say that we do have a lot of vocal people. They call us on phones, they email us. And that's another really kind of interesting thing is email when you do constituent services, because we literally, it takes hours and hours, to get through emails, and you miss one day, and it's incredible. But I started to say also that what you do is you end up getting a consensus in the end that that maybe doesn't make everybody happy, but it does seem to move things forward, and different things in the county get moved forward in different times. I will say that, and we're going to say a little bit about how we're meeting together, but some of the areas that sometimes the city is farther ahead than the county on things. And sometimes the county is farther ahead on the city. The university is frequently farther ahead on climate change issues and things like that. So we all actually get to learn from each other. And the staff in certain areas, like Colette mentioned, the collaboration that's happening in sustainability is really pretty extraordinary. I'm very impressed by the county's interest, the city's interest. And we've had our whole public outreach. We've had university staff at all those meetings, which has just really been fantastic to work together and learn from.
And I'll just put a plug in for that. If you're interested in learning more about that, you can go to climateactiontogether.org.
Yes, good. Thank you very much. That's the city, county, and UVA combined website that says what we're trying to do and where we're going forward.
And I just really quickly, because you sent about emails, So when people write to us, there are times when people write to me about something that's not even in the city and they reside in the county in an issue, and I think certainly vice versa. I've been tossed a few. It just goes to show that our region is less concerned about these boundaries, and I guess maybe some people in the leadership roles maybe. I think Liz and I may be an exception. We're fine with just the whole thing being one. I grew up in an area where we didn't have a separate entity of a city and a county, and everyone kind of was in one form of government. And that presents its challenges, but our constituents, in many cases, especially in the urban ring, honestly don't even know the difference. Some of them literally the next block could be in the county until they go to vote. They don't realize, oh, I'm not even a city voter. Like, oh, I haven't been paying attention to the election for so long. Yeah. And so I just think it's an important reality of just us realizing that we have to be collaborative for the betterment of everyone in this region. When we're not in a collaborative frame of mind, I think it's to everyone's detriment.
Yeah. Okay.
It's kind of interesting, too. If I asked you if you thought the university was in the city or the county, what would you say? Because about 80% of it is in the county.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which most people wouldn't really think.
I learned that when I was door knocking, and I realized, oh, none of my door knocks are on grounds. They're around grounds.
So I think that I wish I knew, maybe I should be asking Sally, was there ever any joint meetings between the city and the county back in when you were on the board? Were they very rare? So I'm going to go to a controversy that Heather was on her board, got on the council in the midst of, which I think really catapulted us into regular meetings, and that was the courts. When I first got on the board of supervisors, I started in January of 2014. I knew nothing about courts. Oh my God, I hardly even knew where the courts were. I didn't know what the difference between a district court and a circuit court. I mean, I've been in environmental stuff. I can tell you where all the sewer interceptors are in the urban area, but I don't know about courts. And one of the first things that our then county executive, we have a different county executive now, brought our board in to talk about what it would look like to move the courts out of the city. And I was a blank slate at that point in time. One of the board members who knew much more about it than I did said, no, you can't do that. That's crazy. There's all these ties. And we agreed as a board at that point in time that we were going to move forward with the plan to keep the courts in the city. The whole conversation, in my understanding, started in the late 90s, where we had community discussions about what we were going to do with the courts. The county, when we run out of room, the county is required by the state to provide more space for the court's operations. So I started getting educated on this, visiting with judges and lawyers and community members, trying to understand, first of all, like, what is the difference between a circuit court and a district court, and what's the history of all this. And this is before Heather was on the city council. We decided as a board that we would have 2 board members meet with 2 city members and the staff to try to work this out. How can we move forward and get this done, because it's been languishing for so long. And after 2 years, it just wasn't moving forward, and we quite frankly couldn't figure out why. In hindsight, there were reasons. I suspect the city didn't want to say where they were going to do the parking because they hadn't bought the land yet, and they didn't want the price of the land to skyrocket if they started talking publicly. I'm making stuff up that I'm assuming now. I don't know if those are the reasons. But we just couldn't get an answer, and we were getting very, very frustrated. And then there were elections. Our board changed. Their board changed. We got together, and by that point, our board majority was thinking it was all hopeless. And maybe we should just move out, and maybe we should go back to this whole discussion. So the whole thing sort of catapulted. I look back on it as a lot of miscommunication, and just yes, dysfunction on both sides, but a lot of miscommunication. And so we ended up having a couple years of fighting and posturing back and forth and being in the newspaper. And I continued to keep my position very firm that I thought it was a social justice issue. The courts had started working very closely together because they didn't have enough funding. And it was less financially able people that were frequently coming before the courts, like people getting evicted, people can't pay their hospital bills, all those kinds of things. But the board majority did not agree with my opinions. So in the end, we were forced, because of legal issues, we could not move out of the city because the state basically wouldn't allow us, and there wasn't a representative that was going to carry that bill forward. And so we all agreed, finally, in the end, to stay here and try to work together. It was a very difficult time. I can say that my advocacy probably had nothing to do with us staying there, and I didn't make any friends. However, what came out of that was an obvious need to meet and communicate. And it was during that period of time that we really started saying, okay, we got to have these city-county joint meetings and try it out,
Because the thing that's different is that our staffs actually do work pretty effectively together, and so we should be elevating that and having them showcase those collaborations and that work, and that we have a lesson to be learned from that ourselves in terms of how we work together.
And I have to just put a little caveat on that. I think we had some reluctance on I think at that moment in time, our higher level staff was not necessarily on the same page.
Sure. Yes.
And that change in both the county executive and the city manager made it much easier to have those negotiations and have everybody on board. But at that point, we really started trying to schedule these things. And that's when we came up with those memorandums of understanding that I mentioned that are in the back. And now the last couple of years, we've tried to have, 2 meetings a year, and now we're talking about 4. Try to schedule that. It's a nightmare. So I don't know that we're really going to be able to get this done. We just got the first city-county one scheduled. I can't remember the date. I don't know if the university is in on that first one. I don't think so. It's in May.
Yep.
So here you go. It took us 5 months to do our quarterly first meeting.
That was challenged by many changeovers and folks, because we couldn't set meetings before we knew who was getting through elections
that's true.
And who was on board. And so there are challenges, but people say it's logistically challenging. There are priority areas that they want us to be talking about in the city, and it's we are now having to be more disciplined in how many work sessions that we have. I guess that was just something I'd just say in general is it's not a normal job, as my husband and my children now understand now. And these demands, like here we are tonight, it's 8:15 on a Wednesday evening, and it's not uncommon that a lot of our demands in the city's council meetings are in the evenings, twice a month. And so it's just, you kind of realize that this is a very different schedule that you're trying to work with, and then you're trying to coordinate with other schedules, and it can prove quite challenging.
And you're also trying to have a life. And we keep thinking it's a part-time job in the county. It's hard to know what you're doing and do this, especially when you have 9-hour board meetings. That's not unusual. A 9-hour board meeting is not unusual. I don't sit for 9 hours well. I don't always feel my legs at the end of the evening, And people say, well, that's ridiculous. No meeting ought to be 9 hours. But there's certain, yes, people talk too much. But there's also legal issues and land use kinds of decisions that have to be made on a timely basis. There's a lot of public hearings, and process that's required by the state too.
And we can wrap it up, but I think in general, I think there is an importance as we go through and we have, new leadership that we all are looking at. Like I mentioned, the university has their strategic plans. What are the things that we can align on? We're not going to align on everything, but what are those areas that we can leverage each other's resources and work together collaboratively? I'm a big believer that we could kind of consolidate some of our operational things to serve the better population more effectively and more efficiently and less expensively. But again, that takes, a much bigger effort than Liz and I, because these are areas that we definitely, I know, agree on personally.
Yeah, my big dream, which is about to get completely crushed, was that before the city gets to be 50,000, because for some reason there's some legal issue with the 50,000, that they would just revert and we would become one community before they became 50,000. But, Lord knows that.
She's counting the people now.
Thanks so much for coming out. My name is Kim, and I am an Albemarle County resident. And this is actually more of a question for the city folks. And as a county citizen, I most recently served as a representative on the Albemarle County Service Authority Board, which is an opportunity that all county residents would have, should they wish, to serve to help in making decisions about issues that basically takes it off the table of their supervisor. Does the city have similar ways that citizens can be engaged on issues that are common to us? So water's a really big thing for us because we're sharing the exact same water supply, but we actually have two different water rates. And the city has a different structure for how it does its water than the county, but we're all getting our water from the exact same place. And citizens in the county can have an impact on some decision making for the urban ring that I don't quite understand how the city handles it.
Do you know how? I actually am not. You're my water expert friend.
What I have always been told is that the city utilities department takes care of it, and there is no board like there is with the authority. The city, I will just say the county, Albemarle County Service Authority has an interesting history in that many, many years ago it used to be in a shoebox in the county executive's office, and the story is that somebody in the county that was dealing with this decided that they should work with their particular development friend and put water lines in where that person had a development going in. This was many decades ago. That person ended up getting charged with corruption and was prosecuted, and my understanding is actually went to jail for a while. I'm a little bit cloudy. It's been years since I heard the story, but that was the time when the county decided that they needed a separate authority that was non-political, that would just do water and sewer and was not going to be subject to that kind of pressure. And so that was decades ago. I don't know if we would have ended up having, a public utilities like the city had that not happened. I really don't know. I'm sure there's more to the story. When I first got on, there was a fella that had been on there already for 30 years, and he was on the first board, and that's the story that he gave.
And our rates are set, and it's intended that it's kind of self-sustaining, that it pays for itself. But we do have many other areas where we have boards and commissions to the point where council actually is considering re-looking at all of those to understand where are we best leveraging our constituents' volunteer time the most, and how do we make them even more effective and efficient. But for that specific example, I was pretty sure we did not have a group that was appointed by council, but there is no lack. There's probably, I think, in the dozens of other opportunities that we do engage with the public to help us in our decision making.
Melvin Burris. My question is to Chip. Chip, I was curious to know is how do you select, or how your board select the projects? And the other one is, once they're selected, how are they get approved? And how do you determine the success or the outcomes of them?
Sure. I'll ask, do you have a type of project in mind? So I could start with that because we do a lot.
Well, I understand. See that. No, I don't have one in mind. You just give me a typical one.
Sure.
Yeah, give us a typical one.
A very good example may be, because it's fairly recent and it's probably very relevant to all of us, are transportation projects. We work through our, especially if it's in Charlottesville or certain parts of Albemarle, with our Metropolitan Planning Organization. It is an appointed board staffed by the Planning District Commission. There are 2 city elected officials on that, 2 Albemarle County elected officials, and 1 official from the Virginia Department of Transportation. We take recommendations from both local governments. We take recommendations from the citizens and stakeholders of the entire community, to include UVA, as well as recommendations from the Department of Transportation. And within one of the activities that we do that was on the slides is our long-range transportation plan. Projects have to be in that long-range plan to then begin to be considered. The MPO board will then make decisions based on the projects within that long-range plan, what to apply for. We do not at this time have any real, sometimes the city and county do contribute, but the real transportation funding comes from the state. So based on the prioritization by that 5-member board, we submit applications to the state for a project. Just trying to think of recently what projects. Well, West Main Street for the city of city of Charlottesville was recently awarded funding from that. But the first step is community engagement. They bring the projects to us. We then help get them into that long-range plan. And then the MPO board prioritizes those to submit funding requests to the state, and then they decide if we get the money or not. That's probably one of the easiest to explain. Some of our planning projects, each of the local governments in our region contribute a certain amount of money to us, and we work with our 12-member board to decide which, with that funding, what is the highest priority planning project. And most recently, that's a corridor project in Zion Crossroads that's both a Fluvanna and Louisa project. One of the things we have to deal with, very similar to what Liz was talking about with the diversity in Albemarle County, a lot of times our rural members don't think the priority should be what Charlottesville and Albemarle think. Those are very, very competing values for the projects that we undertake, and we have to be very conscious of that and try to treat both areas as equally as we can.
So my name is Martha Donnelly, and I'm curious to know, I know that the university began to pay $15 an hour to all its full-time employees a couple months back. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering what the economic outcome has been of that, knowing that, at least broadly speaking, when you talk about, well, $15 an hour, we can't afford it because it'll have these negative consequences on employers, etc. So I'm just curious to know.
Well, a couple things. So we basically told all the departments at the university that you have to figure out how to cover the cost of increasing, if you have low-wage employees, which happens to be a lot in my portfolio because I have facilities management, so a lot of our custodians and tradespeople. But we managed, in other words, we didn't increase tuition or fees or anything like that in order to pay that higher wage. I think what we are hoping, and of course 2 months in, you can't really tell this, but we are hoping that over the longer term, that will reduce the turnover in those types of roles, so that because turnover costs money to us as an employer, you have to go out and you have to hire people, you have to train them again and whatnot. So one of the things where we're hoping to kind of offset that cost is in retention.
And can I ask a quick question on that question? You're implementing that now, Colette?
Yeah, it was effective January 1,
yeah.
The $15.
But it doesn't. You have to. They have to deal with compression just like we have.
Yeah,
my
we
understanding
did adjust
is
for compression as well.
You didn't go through your whole.
No, only in like a kind of a narrow band around the $15.
And that's what the county is doing also.
Yeah. And the city is at $15 an hour as of this last fiscal year, but it was over the course of several years to step up to that because we also were addressing compression.
What's compression?
So it's in layman's terms, it's the impact that so say you're going to put your lowest wagers at $15 an hour, the impact that has on people who are already in the system who may be above $15 an hour, and seeing that those lowest wagers are kind of compressing into like what they are making, and there's a need to then through the entire salary structure to then make those adjustments throughout. And it's not always a one-for-one change, but there is certainly there's formulas around that.
There's no differential or a small differential then between the worker who's making 15 and could be that person's supervisor,
right?
Who could be making $15.50 or something like that, and it's compressed.
And then you do have high turnover. That's when you get to the concerns about retention just from compression.
And the reason why I mentioned compression is you asked about the economic impact of that. It costs a lot more to deal with the compression. It's very expensive if you do it through your whole salary grades. But anyway.
Thanks. My name is Camille Wilson, and the comment about how long things take, Heather, is something I wanted to speak to. I sat on the Parks and Recreation Board in 2007. I think Sally was on the supervisor, and I think Meredith was the counselor. We did 3 athletic field studies. 2 of them we contracted out and paid for, and one we did in-house. And they all showed the same thing, that we needed more field space, rectangular field space. The comprehensive plan has included that since 2007. So in 3 comprehensive plans, that has been projected, and we were at one point we counted them up and said we were seven fields short for the demand. I think the point probably people thought, well, it'll just go down, but it never did. It never has. We have. I know at least 5,000 soccer players that use rectangular fields. We also have football players who use rectangular fields. We have field hockey people who use rectangular fields. We have lacrosse people who use rectangular fields. We have frisbee players who use rectangular fields. You can get up to 10,000 people, adults and children. Now, I'd be surprised if there are 10,000 bikers. In other words, we haven't really seen enough attention paid to this problem. In fact, we've lost fields. Penn Park had a field we don't have. Tracks went around fields, so we could no longer use them. Now, as I understand it, the county has promised to put in some artificial turf fields, which is one way to expand the playing area. And I am unsure whether the city has agreed to that, and I'd like to press for that to happen. In addition, of course, the university has artificial fields that the community would like to use when the students are not here. And the university charges us rent for that, and these are nonprofit sports organizations. And my letter to Mr. Ryan was really, if you want to show some reciprocity, because of course those students from the university play on community teams, that they would not charge us a fee to go up and use those fields. Anyway, I'd like to hear that Darden Town is a jointly owned park, as is Ivy Creek Natural Area, which wasn't listed here, but we're hoping to have some progress. It's been a long, long time. And we got, I think, the numbers to show you that it's needed.
I'm going to take this to begin with, and because I'm about to get myself in real trouble this coming month. So a little bit of background. What is it, 2 years now ago? Maybe a year ago. We made, 2 years ago, the Biscuit Run Park was supposed to be a state park. It's been languishing for years. It used to be a development area. It has some great big sewer interceptors under there that drives me crazy, but that's another story. It's now going to be a county park. There are 6 soccer fields that, well, actually it's going to be a county park. We ended up purchasing it for $1 from the state to try to get it open. Interestingly enough, and this is on my to-do list, I was talking to Heather when we had this conversation, and I said, County Board of Supervisors thinks that they reached out to the city and asked if they wanted to participate, and Heather said, well, I never heard about that. So this is one of these communication issues that I said, well, I'm going to figure this out, and I haven't found that out yet. But regardless, the county is committed to opening up Biscuit Run. And we have the money set aside to get the entrance into there. And I wish I could give you the date that entrance is supposed to be done, but it's like in the next year. It's not very far away. We have a master plan now that has 6 fields, just soccer fields, okay? And I am hoping that it would be a wonderful we'll call it a public-private partnership to see if we could get some groups in the community to help us fundraise after we get the entrance in. Maybe matching funds from the county or whatever. Maybe the city wants to come in on that. We'll have that conversation to try to get those soccer fields in sooner rather than later. I don't know. I can't speak for the city, but I'm betting that they feel just the way the county does, that we need more soccer fields. I think there's general agreement on that. Here's where I'm going to get myself in trouble. I have a real problem with the artificial fields. And, I don't want to put that level of plastic down. There's a whole bunch of reasons why. Getting rid of them, chipping plastic, they're hot, etc. What I would like to do is make a very concerted effort to getting those 6 natural fields in as soon as possible. Because I do recognize the need. Now, I will say my feeling about artificial, you need 4 votes to get anything done on a 6 board. And as far as I know right now, I don't have the votes, so you can just know that. But I just thought, in all honesty, I would go ahead and admit that right now I'm not really in support of that, but I am supportive of getting those 6 fields in at Biscuit Run as soon as we possibly can, and I hope that we have some collaboration with the community in trying to get that done fast.
And we have funding, each of us, I think, in our CIPs for lighting at Darden Town.
We do, and I think we have funding for these artificial turf for both of them. I know that our board agreed to study the artificial turf more before we made a decision, and we're in the process of getting that report out.
And I go to Parks and Rec to understand like what some of the long-range plans are for any areas that we might have enough green space for additional fields, but they're relatively limited. Did you write to me about Walker also today? I want to address that very quickly. That is not going to impact the actual rectangular field of that area. It's going to be adjacent to it, and there will be a community meeting, so I'll be following up. When you started talking, I was like, I'm recognizing some of those points that were raised. But that playground for Walker is a significant priority for that school and its families, and it's not to impede on the existing field infrastructure.
Melvin, did you have a question you wanted to find? Madison?
Hi, I'm Madison Cummings, and I hope that some of us in this room saw the presentation by the people at CDC yesterday in regard to coronavirus. And I'm expecting and hoping that there will be an excess of cooperation, not only locally, but with Richmond, and if the Trump administration ever gets its stuff together, with the feds. But I think this is an existential crisis that I'm hoping that all of you are already having meetings around. Thank you.
We've had briefings from the health department.
As have we, yes.
Well, our doctors, who are the infectious disease docs in the hospital, are on it like daily. Our student health director as well. And we have notices and briefings that go out almost every day in terms of what's happening and what we should be doing.
I would anticipate our public health department will be guiding us regionally on steps to take to protect our communities if it becomes an issue, which I also heard the same message from the CDC yesterday.
I'm concerned with waste and trash. When I'm at home, I get to throw ones and twos in the recycling. When I'm at the university and all of the things that we have laying around there, you can put any plastic in there. It says does the university have a market that's different from what the city and county have? And is there a reason why we can't just go back to recycling where they take all plastics in the city and county?
My understanding from talking to the university person that deals with this, who is an absolute dedicated person to sustainability, is that right now they're riding on a contract that takes everything. And when that contract runs out, they're going to have to reevaluate whether they're going to have to go to ones and twos and possibly fives. Unfortunately, there is not a market for the other plastics right now in this area. Recycling is all about where the closest place is for that stuff to go, who are you going to sell it to. The more pure the product is nowadays, the more you're going to get for it. So anybody that goes to McIntyre, please pay attention to those signs. If it says ones and twos, don't put, a plastic chair in there. We're trying really, really hard with new signs to try to get people to really try to get these things pure so we can get some money for it. But that's the university has generously allowed one of their staff people to serve on our solid waste advisory committee for the county. And that's where I get the information regularly. We have monthly meetings, and he's a vital contributor to the county's solid waste planning efforts. And so that's how I can make that
Thank you very much.
that statement, because that's probably way more in the weeds than Colette ever gets.
If I could just add too, because I think it's a perfect example. Recently, because of the lack of market, which quantities make a very big difference, a discussion that was generated at our commission level resulted in we now have an ongoing meeting with UVA and the solid waste recycling leaders from all of the jurisdictions within our region, so that collectively, perhaps at some point, there will be a much larger market to try to push these items out, that individually it's a lot tougher for just one of the jurisdictions. And it's one of the first times they've really begun meeting on a regular basis.
And solid waste is a really good example of a history of city-county dysfunction, sorry to say. We had a landfill. It was unlined. The university actually contributes to the remediation of that. It was closed, I think, in 2001. Sally, bless her heart, was part of that horrible situation and the lawsuits and whatnot. We have a landfill now that's closed out there that is has to be monitored, forever, I guess. And we have city kind of went their own way and the county went their own way, and that's a longer story for another time. But we're sort of trying to get together again and talk about services and household hazardous waste and things like that we do work together on.
And I thank you four panelists very much.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you.